Hey, you guys, I hope all is well. I'm just hopping on to give a word of the Lord. But before I get into that, let me just say the locks is locking right now. You see that? All right, before I get sidetracked, let me continue. But anywho, I made a post on Facebook asking the men of God what are some examples of how a man leads his wife. So, there were some men who commented and said that, oh, you don't have to be a man of God in order to lead your wife. And I'm like, Kat, what do you mean? I was confuzzled, as you can tell from my facial expression. Very confused, as you can see from my facial expressions. And the reason being is because, first of all, I asked specifically for input from the men of God. I didn't ask it for, from anyone else, because I understand not everyone has the same belief system, and that's perfectly fine. Baby, you are entitled to believe in whatever you want to believe in. As for me and my house, we shall serve the Lord. It's also important to note that shall is a promise. It's a guarantee. It's not an if, and, or but. It's a definite. But aside from that, of my confusion there, it just made me wonder. Well, firstly, it's important to note that submission is a biblical concept. So there is no way that I will ever submit to a man who is not submitted to Christ first. And I wouldn't recommend that for any other woman, and I will explain. So let's start with the basics, right? So we know, based on 1 John 4 and 16, that God is love. So based on the scripture, it says, and we have known and believed the love that God has for us. God is love. And he who abides in love abides in God, and God in him. So, if a man does not have a personal, intimate relationship with God, there is no possible way that he will ever know how to show me true, genuine, authentic love, right? So his idea of love will 9 times out of 10 be extremely tainted. So especially if he grew up in a household where maybe their idea of love was to verbally or emotionally abuse each other, even physically abuse, right? Then that's the way he will most likely love you, or something similar. And you also have to think about it. When you look at the scripture in 1 Corinthians 13 and 4, it gives a perfect description of what love is. Let's talk about it. So it says, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Love never ends. Literally one of my favorite scriptures. So, if a man is not submitted to God, it will be very difficult for him to be able to exemplify those character traits because he has not come into a personal relationship with God. In my experience, and also in other women who I know, who've dealt with men who were not submitted to God, typically there are many men who are riddled by trauma. They have short tempers, anger problems. They have issues with forgiving, holding grudges, like all of these different things because they have never been set free from, childhood instances, even struggles into adulthood. They've never received deliverance. And so their character can tend to be extremely flawed for the men who don't know God personally. And we know when it comes to matters of the heart, only God is capable of healing, restoring, and softening our heart just from the things that we've been through. So, I will continue. A man who genuinely loves God with all of his heart, with all of his soul, with all of his strength, and all of his mind, just as Luke 10:27 says, will know how to be able to pour into me as God pours into him. He would be so submitted to God and so deeply rooted into the true and living vine that there will be nothing that can come up against him that can cause him to waver. Even if he does stumble, right? He will get right back up. He will be able to know how to crucify his flesh when temptation comes. He will know how to surrender to God whenever true problems and attacks come. He would be so grounded by God that whenever the enemy would try to send a beautiful woman to come and tempt and ensnare him, that he would know, listen, I honor my vows before God. I would not do anything to jeopardize not only my heavenly seat that God has secured for me, but also my marriage, my wife that God has gifted me with. When a woman puts herself in a situation to submit herself to a man who is not submitted to Christ, she is putting herself in an extremely dangerous situation to now be in a covenant with a man who could potentially misuse her, abuse her, mistreat her. And guess what? Because now it's a covenant. Now because two have become one, now by scripture, you are joined to this man and you can't leave him unless there's some type of abuse, unless there's some type of cheating or abandonment involved. But here's the thing. We would be wise to make sure that we are looking for particular godly qualities in men before even taking that route with someone. And I say this from personal experience. Like, I was literally in a marriage for 12 years to a man who was a church man. He was not a man of God. And because no one ever taught me the qualities to look for in a true man of God who was submitted, you know, I was in a very abusive, financially abusive, emotionally abusive, sometimes physically abusive marriage. I went through a lot of unnecessary heartbreak, struggle, pain, because I did not have a standard set for me before I took that route. And of course, I will do another TikTok just kind of detailing, kind of my experience with it. I actually just had my divorce finalized after 2 years of separation, like a day or two ago. So even then, like, having to heal from all of that, all because no one told me these things that I'm telling you now. That is why I'm so big on trying to encourage women. Listen, before you take that step, you need to make sure that this man is surrendered, that you have fasted, you have prayed, you have been diligent in seeking God to make sure that this is someone that he's okay with you being with. And it's not to say that you have to be with some apostolic, eagle-eyed, prophetic, shamar, prophet, evangelistic, like, you don't have to do all of that. You have to at least be with a man who has the capacity to understand where the Lord desires to take you, and who also knows his purpose, right? He needs to know his identity. But this is such a good video. So I'm going to have to do a part 2 because I feel like 10 minutes is just not enough to discuss this. So just be on the lookout for my part 2, which I'm going to record very shortly. Thank you. Like, subscribe, and share.